Welcome back to IT Basics. Today, we're cracking open one of the most common help desk mysteries: what actually happens between pressing the power button and seeing the login screen. It's a five-step sequence, the same on every PC, and once you know it, "my computer won't boot" stops being scary. You'll be able to pinpoint exactly which step failed, and that tells you exactly who to call or what to fix. So let's start at step 0, power. When you press the button, you're not actually closing a circuit like an old lamp switch. You're sending a soft signal to the motherboard, which then tells the power supply to release the real voltages: 12 volts, 5 volts, and 3.3 volts, each feeding different parts of the machine. And here's your first diagnostic clue. If this stage fails, there's nothing. No lights, no fans, no beeps. Pure silence almost always means PSU, motherboard, or no AC reaching the wall. Power's flowing. Now the firmware wakes up and runs post, the power on self-test. The CPU quickly walks through the hardware asking, is RAM responding? Is the GPU there? Are the drives spinning? If something's broken, you'll hear it, literally. The motherboard speaker beeps in patterns. 1 long and 2 short usually means the video card, 3 short points to RAM, and complete silence with no display points back to the motherboard or CPU itself. If post passes, BIOS or UEFI takes over, initializes everything, and checks the boot order: SSD, USB, DVD, network, until it finds a bootable drive. That's why PC won't boot from USB is almost always just a boot order tweak away in setup. Let's zoom out and see the whole picture. From the moment you press the button to the login screen, it's always these 5 steps, in the same order, every single time: power, post, BIOS, bootloader, OS load. And here's the trick that turns you into a real troubleshooter. When a machine won't boot, figure out which step it stopped on. Dead silence means power. Beep codes mean post. No boot device points at BIOS. GRUB rescue is the bootloader. Blue screen or kernel panic. That's the OS itself. Identify the step and you've already half solved the ticket. So BIOS just handed off control, and now the bootloader takes over. Its job is simple: pick which operating system to load. On Windows, it's the boot manager calling winload exe, then enter Kernel. On Linux, it's GRUB, that menu with kernel options you've probably seen. Mac OS hides it completely behind boot UEFI unless you hold Option, and when this step breaks, you get the classic no bootable device. Fix it with bootrec on Windows, GRUB install on Linux. Bootloader's done its job. The kernel is now in RAM, and this is where the OS truly wakes up. First, the kernel sets up memory, scheduler, and loads drivers. And if you ever see a black screen with just a cursor, that's usually the graphics driver still loading. Then the first process kicks in: systemed on modern Linux, launched on Mac, smss.x on Windows, and a stuck on logo ticket almost always points right here. After that, services fire up in a parallel: network, audio, antivirus. And finally, the login screen appears. Type your password, desktop renders, boot done. 15 to 45 seconds on a modern PC. Now let's put all 5 steps to work. 4 real tickets, 4 different failure points. Scenario 1, dead silent, no lights, no fans. That's power. Check the outlet and test the PSU. Scenario 2, fans spin, but the screen stays black with beep codes. Post is shouting at you: reseat the RAM and GPU. Scenario 3, brand logo, then no bootable device. BIOS found, nothing to boot. Check the drive and boot order. Scenario 4, it almost makes it, then BSODs or kernel panics. That's the OS stage. Boot into safe mode and roll back that driver. Match the symptom to the step, and diagnosis becomes a 30-second decision. To diagnose like that, you need the vocabulary. Here are 12 terms that show up in every boot ticket you'll ever touch: post, BIOS, UEFI, the firmware layer, MBR and GPT, how the disk is partitioned, GRUB, the bootloader, the kernel, and init, the handoff into the operating system. Then services, login, and recovery, what you see once the OS is alive. Learn these, and when a user describes a symptom, you'll already know which word and which step they're really talking about. Now, with the vocabulary in hand, let's clear up the myths that trip people up. BIOS is not the OS, it's firmware on a chip, and it runs before the OS even exists. Boot order absolutely matters. A forgotten USB stick is a classic won't boot call. Slow boot isn't always old hardware. Check startup apps, a failing drive, or malware first. Fast boot is mostly the SSD, but not only. And recovery mode is a safe environment to fix things, not a factory reset. Never wipe a user's data when a repair would do. And that's the boot sequence locked in. Power to post to BIOS, bootloader handing off to the kernel, kernel starting services, and most importantly, you can now point at which step failed when a ticket lands on your desk. That's the real win here. Next up, we untangle the three most confused terms in IT: internet, web, and cloud. After that, stage 1 wraps with a capstone. See you in Lesson 06.